Okay, we are live. So before I start the stream, I just want to make sure people jump in. So we might wait a few minutes for more people to jump in the stream. And I'll do a brief rundown of what we'll be going through today when we start the stream. Okay, so just beforehand, we're going to Gamefroot, gamefroot.com, making sure we're logged in. And we are making an interactive fiction game today. So that'll be with a new blank game. And then from the tutorials sidebar, if you click on tutorials up there, you want to go to interactive fiction, intermediate resources, and then interactive fiction 101 is in there. And that's what we'll be going through today in this stream. Okay, let's see what the user views are looking like. Okay, we got a couple in there. That's okay. And in the interactive fiction tutorial, we make a story, and it like looks like this, and we get our story filled in there, and then you can press these buttons to go to different parts of the story, kind of like when I was a kid, there was a series of books called Goosebumps, and you could pick your own adventure, and they were kind of spooky stories. So you could make your interactive fiction a story that goes however you want. And if you don't have a story right now, but you're going to write one later, you can always just use the template story that we've got in here, just some filler text. We want to make it interactive, and then you can go and change it later on. There are a bunch of steps in this tutorial, and it's fairly in-depth. It'll probably take us about 45 minutes to do the whole thing. And if we don't have a lot of viewers, we might cut it off short and direct you to follow the tutorial in your own time. Okay, but hopefully we'll get a few more people in the stream soon. So that's, if you wanted to get a head start, that was Interactive Fiction 101, which was in the tutorials sidebar there. Tutorials. And it was under intermediate resources. And that's at gamefroot.com. Gamefroot.com. Okay. Well, let's start the stream. Welcome to Gamefruit's Code Talk, a live digital technology stream on how to code real video games powered by real game developers. I'm Dave and I'm your host. Today we're going to talk about making an interactive fiction game. We've got a tutorial that we'll be going through, so let's jump right into it. So this is at gamefruit.com, and you want to make sure you've got an account and you are logged in. And once you've done that, you want to click Start Making to load into Gamefruit's game editor. Now in here, we should probably add the interactive fiction as a tutorial game in here, but you can access it by going to New Blank Game. And Totally Empty Game, we want to open up the tutorial first, so we'll click Tutorials up in the menu bar, and then Intermediate Resources. And in here, we're looking for Interactive Fiction 101. And we can click Start. Okay, very good. Now, this tutorial will be made up of a bunch of steps where the end product is we've made an interactive story game. And our story will look something like this. It'll be displayed in a nice chat panel. We'll have some buttons That'll be our interface elements, which can send us to different pages in our story. It weaves together game design and English learning skills. So let's go. And then I'm just going to go take me to the tutorial. And step one, what is an interactive fiction? So an interactive fiction is a story, a narrative, where you can pick your own path. You make choices through the story and you lead down to your own outcome. It's like a series of paths. So here's a good diagram of an interactive fiction. Now that's just a part of it. You could have a much more complex interactive fiction than that. There's only really a couple of choices there. And in the games development industry, a narrative designer is someone who would plan this particular thing out. So we're going to do a little bit of narrative and a bit of programming as well. So let's go to the next step. Okay. Okay, writing an opening scene. So first we want to use our text tool here in Gamefroot to write our first scene. Now, if you aren't sure how you want your story to go, that's fine. You can use the template story that we've already written, a little example story. So in this one, the first scene is welcome to my choose your own narrative game. You're at a campsite in a forest clearing. There's a tent and some camping gear here, but you don't recognize any of it. There's a path winding through thick ferns to the west. It seems to lead to a grassy field that you can just glimpse through the trees. To the east, another path skirts a copse of towering kauri and ends at a dark-mouthed cave. Which way do you want to go? A. West to the field. B. East to the cave. So I'm going to copy and paste that and chuck that in my first bit of story. Okay. Now, let's play that to see how that looks. At any time, we can play our game just by clicking play. So this is how it looks. Now, it's not as pretty as the screenshot we saw before, and we can't do anything in the game either. Can't click, can't press any keys. None of this does anything. So we're going to combine the data of the story that we write with the programming that we'll write for the interface. So let's move on and do that. Next step, we'll create our user interface. And our interface is going to look something like this. If you wanted to upload other images, you could totally do that and change how the interface looks. Up to you. Now, these interface elements are actually in a marketplace pack in Gamefroot. So if we click Explore Marketplace and scroll down to Interactive Fiction Starter Pack, that's the one we want. And then we can click Add to your game. Add to your game. Okay. Now we have these elements. We want to arrange them in our level. I'm going to zoom out a tiny bit so I can move my text. I'm going to use the selection tool here, drag on my text to move it out of the way, because I don't actually want to see this text. I want to see the interface. I'm going to place the interface up in the corner of my game like so. Move my text out of the way a little bit. I'll zoom back in, just make sure that is in the corner. That looks pretty good. And then we have our text panel. Our text panel is going to go in front of that background, roughly in the middle like that. Looks pretty good. And then over the top, we've got our A and B buttons. A and B. And here's a tip. You can select an object and use the arrow keys or shift arrow keys to move it around. I like that to be nice and precise. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now, that's the interface. We then need to put another text field in our interface which is going to display whatever page we're on in our story. So we'll go to that text field again, click in here, and I'm just going to type something like story text will be displayed here. Story text will be displayed here. Good. Now if we play the game, we should be able to see our interface updated. But we can't see our story anymore. That's fine. We're going to update this text field. We're going to program it to read in what our story is, and then we'll program these buttons to take us to different pages in our story. Okay, let's close that. We've done a good chunk of work here, so let's go File, Save, Game. File, Save. And what am I going to call this? I'm going to call this Interactive Fiction Stream. Now you'll want to call that whatever your story is named. Okay, always good to save every now and then, just to get your progress updated. And then what do we want to do next? Next, we want to get our buttons working. Okay, so let's right click on button A and add a script. Now in here we want to detect when we press the A key. We also want to detect when the A button itself is pressed on. So we'll go to events, and first we need a block when the player presses myself. That's how we detect when the button is clicked on. So we need that block. We also need that keyboard block from events under keyboard when backspace delete pressed. Drag that up and change backspace delete to A. So if they press the A key on their keyboard, it'll also work. Okay, so we've got these two. Now, we want to tell the game that the key's been pressed. So we're going to broadcast a message. And Gamefroot has a great messaging system that we can take advantage of. So we can go to events, and down the bottom we want broadcast message under message sending. Broadcast message, and we want to connect this block into when the A key is pressed, and we're just going to broadcast capital A, and that's it. Broadcast capital A. And a little bit later on we'll get our story text receiving this message and then updating itself accordingly. Let's duplicate by right clicking duplicate broadcast A and connect it into when the player presses myself. So when you click on the button or press A, it's going to broadcast A, and the game will know later on what to do. Okay, that's all we need for now. So let's close that script, save that, call it ButtonA. Very good. That's button A done. We can tell that it's got that script there by the icon. Now button B doesn't have a script on it yet. We're going to do something very similar. So let's right click on B button and add a script. And it's going to basically be the same, except swapped out for B. So again, we'll go to events, and we want when the player presses myself. And we also want when backspace delete is pressed. And we'll change that to B. B, that's what we wanted, when B is pressed. And then we want to broadcast our message, which is from events. Down the bottom, broadcast message, let's make that B. Same thing for when we press myself. Okay, the buttons are halfway done. The next bit is a little bit later on for our story. Let's close that script now, save it, and call it ButtonB. Okay, so button A and button B are programmed up. Let's look at the next step. Now we need to prepare our first scene for display. So what we want to do is go down a bit here and find our first story scene that we wrote out, and we're going to add some information to it. Okay. Let's right click on our first story scene and add a script. Okay, we want to give it a bit of information. So we're going to say when you're created, add a tag on yourself. So go to events, and up the very top we've got when created. As soon as this piece of text is created in the game, which will happen just before the level loads, we want to tag it so it can be identified. Tagging blocks are under sensing. We want this block, add tag, tag name on myself. And the tag name should be, let's tag it as camp start, because they're in their camp, as we can see in the story. They're in a camp in a clearing, so we'll call it camp start. And that is how to give it its name. Let's move on to the next step. So we've given it its name. Now we want to give some more data to this object. We want to know, where are you going to go if I press A, and where are you going to go if I press B? So we've got our first scene, and then we need to hook it up to going to the next scenes, depending on the choice that's chosen. For that, we're going to use some key value pairs. If we go to events, and down under the keys section, halfway down, we want this block, set key name on myself to value. Now, what is a key? It basically is a piece of data with a name and then a value. So an example might be my name, and then the key would be name, and the value would be John or Brad. So the value, the key name here is going to be choice A, just like that. And the value is going to be field, because the A button will take us to the field in our story. Okay, now what about choice B? Well, let's right click, duplicate, set key. We're going to set up another key on this object. It's going to be choice B. The name of the key is choice B, and the value is going to be cave. So choice A takes you to the field, choice B takes you to the cave, and this bit of story now has that information. Okay, let's close the script, and what are we going to name it? Let's name it Scene 1 Camp Start. Okay, good. Now, sadly, okay, we don't really have very many people in the stream, so we might cut this one off here, but I will direct you to the tutorial so that you can continue having a look at it. Now, we got, how far did we get? We got about a third of the way through, so that gives you a good introduction into how the interactive fiction game is going to work. If you go back, so let me just show anyone who was wondering how to get to that tutorial. So you want to make sure you go to Gamefroot, and that's gamefroot.com, and then you want to make sure you're logged in. You want to go start making, and then new blank game, tutorials, and intermediate resources. And in there, the tutorial is Interactive Fiction 101. And hopefully you can go and follow that along and see what you need to do. So I hope you enjoyed that little bit of an introduction to interactive fiction. And don't forget, that's at gamefroot.com. Alright, well, we'll catch you in the next stream.